Tracon stream. We're live here with our cosplay guest of honor, Enayla Cosplay. We'll be talking about cosplay, big costumes, maybe some tips for beginners, cosplay photography, conventions, and, well, whatever comes up. But I'm sure you've heard a good 1,000 times, welcome to Finland, welcome to Tampere, welcome to Tracon. But
thank you.
I'd like to rewind a little bit. However did you end up here?
To be honest, I have a feeling there's a particular person I think I have to thank for being here, and her name is Jenny. And I met a cosplayer at another convention actually in Denmark, and she was like, yeah, I'm a little bit organized for a Tracon in Finland. Would you be interested in coming? And I was like, oh yes, I'd be very, very interested in coming. So I'm very, very thankful. Thank you to the entire Tracon staff for having me out here because I've been having a wonderful weekend so far. So.
Okay. Now, just a little thing just between you and me. I mean,
yeah.
Nobody's watching.
Okay.
We Finnish people have this really big need to know what everyone else thinks about us. So could you tell us a little bit, what did you know about Finland before you came here? Or had you been before or heard anything?
I'd never been. I didn't know too much. I think I have an old friend who did an exchange student here for a little bit. But otherwise, not very much. I heard it was cold. I heard it was near Russia. When I visited, quite a few people were telling me, yeah, Finnish people are they're very reserved, they're very quiet, maybe a little bit rude almost right off the bat. And I have to say, I think that person just straight up lied to me because everyone's been so sweet and so kind. And yeah, no, I'm having a really good time here so far. So I don't know what that's about, but apparently it doesn't happen in this tiny little bubble that is Tracon. So.
Yeah. I've heard that before. There is a little bit of a convention bubble. We're happy to have that here. You've been to a lot of conventions around the world here and there, and you've seen a lot of Tracon here so far. Maybe some interesting differences or similarities you could note?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm from the United States, and I'm used to quite a lot, generally bigger conventions, because we have ones with 100,000, 200, 300,000 people.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Yeah, you are, and you'll get there. So I'm generally used to a bit bigger conventions. But I have to say, I actually really, really love some of the smaller events. I've been to several conventions in Denmark and Sweden, and now Finland. So been kind of working my way through the Nordic countries. And I love some of these smaller events because they're so close-knit. You know, you walk through and everybody sort of knows each other, and they all say hi, and it's sort of this big reunion convention that we don't really get quite as much at some of the bigger ones that I'm used to in the U.S.
I could imagine. So
yeah.
If I get that right, you still have Norway and Iceland to go.
I do, yes.
Okay,
someday.
So here's the tip going.
Wink, wink. Yeah, so
yeah.
Eventually.
There was just a very, very big cosplay photography and video project done in Norway. We had a teaser here shown, and so the scenery might be nice for some photo shoots. So, but we'll keep that in mind.
Okay, well, that'll be great. And yeah, I think I actually saw some of the photos from that. It was phenomenal. You have some beautiful, beautiful landscapes. We had about a couple-hour drive because I flew into Helsinki, and I was just like staring out the window the entire time because I'm used to just skyscrapers and things like that. So
yeah, it's a little bit lower here.
Yeah, a little bit.
I mean, when we get one tall building in town, it's like, whoa, we're 10 years after, we're still like, whoa, it's so big.
So I'm staying at a hotel a couple blocks away, and I have a feeling everybody always comments like, oh, it's the ugly, like the huge, like 20-story skyscraper building. I'm like, that's my hotel, thanks. The nice thing is, though, because we were going and exploring the city a little bit, and wherever you are, you can always kind of find your way back home because you can see it in the distance.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It's called the Tower Hotel here, obviously, so simple. We don't have an imagination, sorry.
It's okay.
Okay. You had a program here about big costumes. How did that go?
That went really well. I just did that about 15 minutes ago, so my voice might be a little bit struggling. But yeah, it was really good. Tons of people came. They all asked questions. I have a feeling if you come to some more conventions in the near future that you're going to see a bunch of really big projects because there were a lot of people saying, yeah, I have this idea and I have this idea and I want to work on this. And I'm glad that you went through and sort of told the process and stuff because I do my absolute best to make it less intimidating and stuff like that because I think with a lot of these big oversized projects that you like to build, it's a little hard to get started, and you're not quite sure where to get started on that kind of thing. So,
well,
yeah.
we have a lot of big stages in Finland, and
yeah.
we also have big doorways to the stages.
You do, yeah, and all the ceilings in this entire hall are just massive, so it's very appropriate.
So it's like, give it your best shot to everyone. Okay.
But if I have encouraged a lot of sort of annoying hallway blocking and stuff, I do apologize for that.
No, yeah. Oh, the security people just love challenges. Yesterday you were judging in the World Cosplay Summit preliminaries, so could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, it was amazing. This is the second time I've judged a qualifier for the WCS, and so the winners for WCS, they go on to Japan and compete amongst all the countries. So it's this huge, huge international competition, and that means it's so much fun as a judge because people bring these beautiful, beautiful, very detailed, elegant, dramatic costumes to show off. It's some of like the really, really high quality stuff. And I really love coming as a judge because, well, A, it's a lot less stressful than coming, right, as a contestant. But also in the judging room, the contestants, they come in one at a time and they talk to us about how they made their costumes and sort of head to toe what was challenging and what went wrong and weird materials that they used.
So you get like a behind-the-scenes story from each one
exactly.
of them.
And I personally really love it. So I've been cosplaying for a long time, 12 years, and I'm constantly sort of learning new techniques. But I love it because I always learn things myself. Somebody comes up with this great way of doing, you know, a new hoop skirt or a different way of having a weapon that floats or whatever. And I'm like, oh man, okay, I might have some ideas for my next project.
Okay, so it's also an intelligence gathering mission.
It is.
Okay.
Don't tell anyone, but yes.
Oh, of course not. We'll just keep it between you and me. Okay, now we asked you for some photos to send, and they should tell your entire life story, I believe.
Maybe not quite, but a little bit relevant to cosplay, especially recently.
We'll get close to that, I hope. So we have 2 photos to look at, and we'll talk about some. Could we see the first photo, please?
All right. Yeah, so this was a recent project of mine. These are 2 characters from the video game Guild Wars 2, which is very near and dear to my heart. I love this game. I've been playing it for years and years and years. And this was a project that I really appreciate because I got to take part in a big animal rights charity recently. So what we did is, it was all organized actually by my guild leader in the game, and she brought together over 150 artists, so fan artists from Guild Wars, and designed a full tarot deck. So, you know, fortune-telling card deck, and every single card has different artwork on the back and stuff, so a huge volunteer project all came together. And I was kind of like, okay, maybe I could be a card back, but I thought, let's keep it consistent, we'll keep it with the artwork. So I was like, I will be your promotional cosplayer, which would be fun because I already had several costumes already designed from the game. So all the artists, they all worked together. They did this beautiful, beautiful production. I got to borrow some of the cards early, do a photo shoot with them, with 2 of my costumes. So the photo you can see, those are both me, composited together. And we actually raised more than $200,000, which was absolutely amazing. And so a good chunk of that went to an animal rights charity, and that goes and researches, you know, save the whales essentially. So I'm really, really proud of that. It was a whole bunch of people working very, very hard, many, many hours for a good cause. And I'm really proud of things where I can make cosplay sort of pay it forward and stuff. So
maybe some of our watchers will be getting some ideas from that. We haven't seen such a project here so far, but you know, I think there might be an interesting place for that.
Yeah, no, we were actually, honestly, we were really surprised because we have just enormously talented artists, and they're known, you know, within the small Guild Wars 2 community. But our initial goal for this, we did it on Indiegogo, it was 14,000, and we broke 200. And so we were just shocked at how popular and excited people were over this project, and added a whole bunch of stretch goals, and we have some amazing things that went along with that. So.
Sharing happiness is something that can become pretty addictive.
Yeah, I'm really, really happy with that. And so I think the whole group, we're all going to come together and make this an annual thing, I think, and donate it to new things. So.
Okay, that seems interesting. And maybe we'll look at the second picture.
All right. So the second one is appropriate because I'm wearing this costume today. This is a little bit more personal one for me. But I actually just did this photo shoot a couple weeks ago. This is my first time actually doing a photo shoot with a horse, which is something I think every cosplayer sort of has this idea, that sort of dream photo shoot would be really exciting. And so the character I'm wearing today from Westworld, she spends a good chunk of the TV show riding around on a horse. And so I happen to have some very, very, very good friends who her sister was coming into town and going for a horse show, and says, do you want to do the 4-hour drive and come down and do it? And so we got to do like dream cosplay photo shoot very recently.
I have to ask, did it take a lot of practice for that photo shoot? I mean, obviously the horse has a little bit of a mind of its own.
For sure. Well, we were like, first time I've been on a horse maybe once or twice when I was 9 or 10 years old, so I'm not an experienced rider at all. So we were like, okay, we probably not doing a lot of galloping, probably not going to ride around. We were just standing very still. Honestly, the horse, immense trooper. His name is Bubba. He's a lovely, older, one-eyed horse who was working with us, and he was a dream. Just absolutely no problem at all, no casualties whatsoever. So that was amazing, and I'm really glad that I got a chance to do it.
Mm. Well, that might also be an interesting idea for around here. I know there's a lot of stables around here, and there are cosplayers. I mean, one thing at a time. We did a lot of cosplay photos ice skating, not just obvious ones, but we have ice, and one of the conventions was right near an ice skate rink.
Perfect,
so one time, so, well, interesting environments.
I'd be a little worried for the delicate costumes and stuff like that with falling over a lot on the ice, but you know.
Yeah.
You make it work.
Yeah. Okay, but again, I love to use the word rewind, it seems, so I'd like to go a little bit back to where it all began. Where did Enayla Cosplay, your cosplay career, begin? Were you maybe in the convention scene beforehand already, or was cosplay your ticket in?
Cosplay was sort of my ticket in. So Enayla, my user, or sort of alias name or whatever, it was an elven name generator that I used for an old RuneScape username like way back in the day. So that was the origin of that. And as a cosplayer in particular, my very first sort of exposure to cosplay was my dad's a really big comic book nerd, and so we decided family vacation we're going to go to San Diego Comic-Con. This is sort of a dream that he had wanted to go to for a long time. And so, you know, I've always been a gamer, I've always been into comics and movies and stuff like that. So I thought, okay, really fun, family vacation, we would all go out. And I remember I went to this convention, and it was sort of, all these people were dressed up in these amazing costumes and sort of embodying in real life these characters that I had grown up with and that I just fell in love with. And I thought it was so exciting. It was something I could never imagine. And so that was when the bug hit about 12 years ago. And yeah, I haven't
pretty soon after that you started.
Yeah, and then I made my first costume right afterwards. My very first cosplay was actually from Guild Wars 1. It was the Mesmer cover art from Guild Wars 1. So I've been doing cosplays from that game for many, many years. Yeah.
Okay. I remember when we were starting here, all we had were magazine photos. There had not been any events, but it started, and fortunately nowadays it's very easy to bump into cosplayers in various towns.
Yeah, no, it's taken off so much. I remember, it's been more than a decade, and when I was first starting, we had no resources at all. Like, I'm so jealous of cosplayers now because we have thermoplastics and Warbla and so many, resin and stuff. When I first started, we had cheap Halloween wigs that were so shiny that you had to, dilute them down with fabric softener, and you would dye them in, with Sharpies in your bathtub, and everything was cardboard and craft foam, and that was sort of what we had to work with. So yeah,
improvisation is a big part.
Yes, for sure, and it's a really good time to get into cosplay now, I think, because there's so many resources and tutorials and just easily accessible supplies. So.
What kind of tips would you give for a beginner, someone who had the same experience? He comes to Tracon, maybe says, oh, wonderful costumes, I want to do that myself. I mean, where to begin? What's a good first costume and things like that?
So I'd say, for sure, start with something reasonable, right? So start with a fairly simple costume, start with something that you think you can achieve, because it's going to get quite frustrating otherwise. So a lot of my very early costumes were so simple. There were t-shirts and skirts and boots and, nothing too crazy. I personally, I taught myself basically everything. I taught myself to sew. I went to a garage sale. I got a $10 1952 Singer sewing machine. It had one stitch. And I got a couple of commercial patterns, and I just sort of taught myself. I cut up bed sheets from the thrift store, and that was how I started learning how to sew. Nowadays, I'd say go on the internet is probably the best way because there's a huge amount of resources for everything that you would want to do. So if you're say, I want to start out with armor or whatever, there are hundreds and hundreds of ebooks and tutorials. There's a huge section on DeviantArt. There are major Facebook groups that are dedicated to that kind of thing. And the resources are all out there. There's a lot of tutorials. Start with maybe cheaper materials or materials that you can waste a few, just sort of figuring out how they work together and what works for you.
Learn as you go, basically.
Yes, for sure. But yeah, no, I'm a total advocate of sort of just jump in there, just get into it. It's so much fun, and I'm so glad that I've done this for all these years. But it was, you know, completely trial and error, and it was, you know, I've had my fails as everybody else has, but
every good hobby has that.
yeah, yeah.
You mentioned this materials a few times on your social media feeds. You've also mentioned hoarding materials. So I take it you have now some big warehouse somewhere in the desert with like full of potential cosplay materials.
I wish I had a warehouse. That would make my job a lot easier. I don't. But yeah, no, I try and save as much as I possibly can. It's good because a lot of the materials that I work with, for example, I do a lot of thermoplastic Warbler armor. A lot of the like offcuts and little bits and pieces you can actually reheat and smush together and reuse. So, and then a lot of times on costumes I'll have, you know, just a small little section, maybe an applique or some little details out of one type of fabric. And so I'll reuse scraps all the time, like constantly I'm reusing scraps. And I have a couple costumes that are almost completely just pulled out of my scrap fabric bin and stuff like that without having to buy a lot of materials. So yeah, if you have any sort of space, I mean, I don't take up, you know, I have a couple bins from IKEA that I keep all my stuff in. And if you have a little bit of extra space, it's worth saving that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think the main thing that I hoard, honestly, is costumes, because I've never gotten rid of any of my cosplay costumes before.
I know that feeling, yeah.
Yeah, and I've been, you know, do you sell your costumes or are you going to get rid of them anytime? And I'm like, oh, they're my babies. Like, I know I can't sell my child, so hanging on to most of those. But,
yeah, I think me and several others can relate to that. Well, you have talked a lot about the details, but give a little example of the whole process from idea, I want to do that cosplay, on to the final ending when you have it at a convention or at a photo shoot.
Okay. Yeah, so what I'll do, my first thing is definitely planning stage. So I'll go through and I'll get a whole bunch of reference images for the costume I'm working on. And sort of just get a feel of what the character looks like, rotate them around, figure out sort of what materials we're looking at, what kind of, you know, real-world material would translate well to this particular character. And if it's a material that I've never worked with before, I'll usually try and sort of do some just basic tests. I'll go look up any sort of relevant tutorials and I'll just play around with it a little. Because it's always better to sort of mess up a few times with your test practice than make a huge, big, you know, amazing armor piece and it just doesn't work out for some reason. So yeah, a lot of time in planning, I do a lot of sketching and notes and lists and things like that, because that's just
basically careful planning before you just jump into it.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely like obsessive planning, too much planning, more planning than you need, but that's sort of my personal method. And so then I'll go into, depending on what kind of thing it is, if it's armor or sewing or whatever, I'll start patterning. And so I do a whole lot of mock-ups. That's one of my favorite things, is just, because, you know, it's the non-scary part, right? You're not going to mess up anything important with your mock-up. And then by the time you get to the final fabric or whatever, you've already had practice making the garment 3 or 4 times. And so it's a lot less scary at that point. But so I do a lot of mock-ups. I buy bed sheets from the thrift store. And
very common here as well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I don't buy muslin or anything. I just buy thrift store bed sheets. And I do a lot of just sort of cheap, low-quality foam or whatever for testing out my armor pieces and stuff. And then I'll do it with better materials afterwards. Yeah, okay, so mock-ups are done, and then I'll go ahead and start working on the real project. I usually like to do sort of one full piece at a time, so I'll do, you know, all the armor pieces at once, and then I'll work on the sewing or whatever, just so I'm not jumping between too many things. And, you know, I have limited workspace, and so that's usually what I'll do. But if something's getting really frustrating, it's, you know, I'd say put it aside and work on another piece and come back to it, because a lot of times I'll sort of just be, you know, daydreaming, and I'll come up, oh wait, this is a way better way of handling this situation that's, you know, not working out quite as well for me. So.
Have you ever been locked in like a sort of developer's hell, basically, like you're eternally working on a costume and it just never gets finished?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I'm sort of in that issue right now, currently. Most of the time I sort of do one costume at a time, and I've been, you know, I finish one costume and I move on to the next. Right now, for some strange reason, and I think it's partially because a lot of TV shows just kind of keep coming out with new designs and it's time relevant, I have 4 projects in motion right now that I keep sort of jumping between anytime I get frustrated with the fabric that's not working out, or I don't like the way this pattern is working, I'll sort of jump onto another one. But eventually, hopefully I'll get those done before I move on to something else. But.
They've never had to leave something just, okay, this is never getting finished.
Yeah, I think I may have one or two in the graveyard that from years and years ago, but almost everything, because if once you buy the materials, then you're sort of locked into it. And
No
at
way
that
out.
point, yeah, I'm not dropping a couple $100 on, yeah, so.
Yeah, I get the idea. Let's talk a little bit about the cosplay scene in general. There's these classic things that at least here come up a few times. What is true cosplay and what is fake cosplay? You might have a beginner who jumps online, buys a costume, goes to the convention and meets friends playing, and then there's someone who designs and works on a costume for a year and then comes to a big competition in the convention. Are they both cosplayers?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. There's been, you know, a little bit of criticism of the cosplay community sometimes, and that, oh, it's a little elitist. People are kind of have these cliques, they have these little friend groups and stuff. And I have never understood that at all. It does not make sense to me, because at a certain point, it's like we're all just nerds. We're nerds in costumes. We're dressing up as fictional video game characters. Like, there's nothing elitist or fancy about that. It should be this sort of really nice community thing. It should be a fun time. And, you know, if you're getting really hung up on what other people are doing, then, like, you are cosplaying wrong, because this should be about you having a good time in whatever way that you want to work on your cosplay. So bot cosplay is fine, maid cosplay is fine, beginners are fine, people who compete all the time, it's all valid. And
I would say the conventions are doing a good work in pushing away those boundaries generally, because honestly, what you heard about Finns wasn't probably all wrong, because they during one day of Tracon they might speak more than during 364 other days altogether.
Yeah, no, I love the joke about, like, people always say, like, you know, nerds are very, like, antisocial and all that stuff, and I'm like, have you been to a convention? Because we will socialize beyond the point of any normal person can handle. But yeah,
and with new people too, make new friends. Oh,
yeah,
I love that character. Can I take a picture? And
yeah, no, honestly, I mean, to be honest, that's I like the engineering challenge. I like the way, you know, I like the process of making cosplay. But for me, like, the main reason that I'm into cosplay is to meet people. Because it's like you go to cons and you're just a walking advertisement for, hey, I love this thing. Please come and talk to me about it. And I've met so many people through it. It's this fantastic, you know, way of just expanding all of your horizons and meeting new people and traveling to new places and stuff. So.
Okay, so let's keep it fun.
Okay. Yes, all please.
Right. Okay, a few words about cosplay photography. That's an important part of cosplay. I mean, you have the mobile phone shots, then you have photo shoots, stage photography, studio photography. Maybe share some experience of interesting cosplay photography?
Yeah. So I've had the very good luck to work with some just phenomenal photographers over the years. And I tend to get a few photographers I work with quite a lot, because we sort of mutually really like each other's work and the way that we work and stuff. But yeah, no, I've done a whole slew of things. My favorite type of, you know, shoots to do are location shoots. So I love going off to really beautiful exotic places and doing cosplay shoots that are appropriate for the character and stuff like that. And, you know, luckily I live in Washington, and so I'm fairly near Vancouver, British Columbia, and Seattle. And near a big mountain range and stuff. So we have a nice variety of things. So I go out to the desert and I'll go and shoot, you know, my Western costumes, and I'll go up to the mountains and I'll shoot The Witcher or Dragon Age. So that's a lot of fun. But I also have done a fair number of studio shoots as well. So like the tarot card project I showed earlier, that was a studio shoot. Those are really convenient and nice, because you can get into costume in a nice, you know, bathroom, and you don't have to, you know, there's no problems with getting changed in the middle of a field, and you can get water and, you know, stuff like that. But yeah, no, they're both really fun. And then sort of recently I've been doing actually a lot of my own self-photography, so self-portraits. So I have my camera, I'll put it up on a tripod. I have a little clicker, a little self-timer, and I've been doing a lot of my own sort of cosplay photography. Partially just if I finish a costume that's like really time relevant. So for example, this costume I finished right before the second season of the TV show came out, and I wanted to have photos like right away and be able to sort of edit them to match the show and sort of have control.
Set up a little home studio, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. Or even I'll take them out. I took this one out to like a location and did a photo shoot, you know.
One person photo shoot.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's really nice. It's hard. Like, you're gonna get a huge number of just throwaway photos and stuff like that, because, you know, it's
You can't see yourself.
yeah,
you
you
don't get
can't
the
see
tip.
yourself.
Yeah.
You hope it's okay. Usually I'll try and bring a friend along and sort of say, hey, you stand here, I'll set up everything, I'll decide how I want the lighting to work and stuff like that, and then I'll switch with you, and
Yeah.
you can sort of just give me a reality check if it's focusing and technical things. But yeah, no, self-photography is really, really fun. I like it in particular because, you know, as a cosplayer, I'm a rudimentary photographer, right? So some beautiful, amazing professional photographer might give me more, you know, artistic shots and stuff. But as a cosplayer, I have spent all the time on the costume, and I have a really good idea of sort of what pieces I like more, what pieces I want to show off more. I also have a good idea of, like, if the costume is shifting or if anything's in the wrong spot or something's falling off.
So you're your own best judge.
Yes, exactly. So I quite like doing my own photography sometimes, just because I can choose photos that showcase the costume in sort of the best possible way. So yeah.
Maybe we want to give a few tips to someone, again, cosplay beginners, like how to look good in a photo.
I mean, to be honest, like, my tip is take 600 photos, post 2 of them. You will hopefully get one. But yeah, it's total practice. If you ever ask anybody about sort of how do you posing tips and things, practice in the mirror. That's what I do, and I still do it for every new costume that I have that has sort of a different personality. Just practice in the mirror. Everybody has sort of good angles and good lighting in the way that their costume looks nice and stuff. And so I'll do that, but also just go and do photo shoots, and don't be afraid to sort of move around and look awkward and feel strange, because you're taking hundreds and hundreds of photos. Like, digital photography allows you to do that.
True.
And so a lot of times, like, just sort of, you know, trying things out or doing weird poses that feel really strange, oftentimes they look super dynamic and are really impressive.
And sometimes the failed photos can be the best
photos.
photos.
Sometimes they look ridiculous, and I have a huge album on Facebook that's just trash photos, you know, outtakes and bloopers, and they're great. So
yeah, they can be that. Yeah, you've seen a little bit about cosplay photography here in Finland. We have our studio here, and one can just walk in and get their photo
that's so
taken.
nice. Yeah.
So any tips, maybe some ideas we could steal, or interesting comparisons between the world other conventions?
Oh, I have no idea. So the idea of sort of a convention studio is actually, I'm not familiar with that. So that seems to be a new thing to me. I love it because it's really cool. It's a little, you know, it's a little more generic, so you're not going to have like a fancy background that fits the character. But it's really nice if you come to a con and you just want to guarantee that you have some good photos of your costume and good lighting and things.
But we have a photo shooting reservation system too, but of course that's it takes more time, but the studio we can get maybe 1,000 people there.
Yeah, no, that's super nice. Especially since I think a lot of us build our costumes for a convention, or like at least for the first time. So it's good to just make sure that we have at least some, you know, photos to show it off.
But interesting backgrounds help. I could agree that maybe we need to get a few interesting background options, like choose from 5. And
that would be really cool. I've never been to a convention that does this, but I've heard of some cons that will build sort of little photo studios. So there's like, here's sort of a castle-like looking thing, or here's like a schoolhouse or whatever. They just bring in a few props, maybe a couple desks and a blackboard or whatever. And then people who can come in and take photos with this nice, you know, sort of set.
We just need to toss out a couple of vendors, and we can have lots of room for that.
If there's any way to do that, that would be really neat if you want a next step. But I've also been spending a lot of time just outside. You have the venue here is amazing. So it's by this beautiful lake with all these trees and flowers and fully in bloom. So I've been doing just a lot of like spontaneous photo shoots right near the convention center. And yeah, you're very, very lucky to have that here, because a lot of the cons I go to are sort of in the middle of the city, skyscrapers everywhere, and so unless you're in a very modern-looking costume, so not what I'm wearing, it's just not going to quite be right. So,
true. We have a lot of old industrial buildings. I'm not sure if you've been around them, but they're also very popular photo shooting areas.
That sounds fantastic. I haven't seen them yet, but I'll have to wander a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. I think we're about finished here with the main questions. However, there is something more scary that we still must do. You know, we have a horror-themed convention here. We must live very true with that. So I would like you, Enayla Cosplay, to share with us your horror story.
All right. I have one. This isn't quite as scary in the regular sense, and I'll show a photo if I can in a moment. But I do have what I like to call a cosplay horror story. So as a cosplayer, we all have them. It's kind of the moment when something goes horrifically wrong on your costume. And I think it's really important to sort of tell some of these stories and share them around the campfire, right? Because a lot of the times for cosplayers, all we really see is the highlight reel. And you don't really see sort of all the fails that you have and things that went very wrong and stuff. So I think this one is probably my worst one. So it's relevant to this costume. This is, you saw it earlier, but it's masquerade armor from Guild Wars 2.
Yes.
This was a huge, long project for me. I was working on it for many, many months. And I was at university at the time. I would break into the apparel design classroom and go use their dress forms and their sewing machines. Again, don't tell anyone.
Of course not. Just between you and me.
Yeah. And so I was there and I was working. It was spring break and I was almost done with this costume, like almost done. And I had this huge hoop skirt. We're talking 30, 40 meters of fabric on this big thing, satin and very expensive, like nice things that I had slaved over and hand painted and hemmed. And so I had the whole thing on a dress form, and I was sort of finishing touches. I was sort of climbed underneath the skirt and was just like snipping little threads and just sort of cleaning up the inside. And my scissors got away from me and I cut a hole right in the middle of the back of that like dark blue fabric on the very bottom, about this big. And I was staring at this thing and I was like, oh my gosh, like how did I manage to do this? This costume is finished, it's ready to go. And I remember I was at school and I called my mom up on the phone and I was like, Mom, I just cut a hole in this thing. I've spent like actually a year working on it. I'm on the 3rd floor of this building. Tell me not to jump. Because wouldn't have actually happened, but because I was just, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened. But it worked out okay. I managed, there's a patch on the inside. I sort of glued it and fray checked it and sort of hid it in a fold. And managed to make it okay. I think if you see that photo, you have to look real closely to find the problem. But yeah, no, stuff like that, it happens.
It's a horror story, but you survived.
Yes, I did survive. I have made it through unscathed, so.
Okay,
yes.
Well, it's a good idea. We're going to end this interview on the note of survival, which is good for a horror convention, and we still have time to go to the ending ceremony. Thank you, Enayla Cosplay, for being with us, and I hope you have an interesting rest of your stay here.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate the entire organizers of this convention have just been, absolutely stepping it up, making me feel very welcome, and everybody who's come up and said hi and sort of come to my panels and been involved. So thank you to everyone. I really appreciate it.
Let's hope we see you again. Thank you.
Thank you.